and social inclusion. We have developed again a center on gender issues, but more of that. And Ibu Julia will tell more about it. Please.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. First of all, welcome Marina, Ambassador Berg. She happens to be a personal friend as well. Thank you so much for making the trip to our office. This event is a pioneering event in many ways. First of all, is having it in the garden. This was quite stressful because we were worried about the rain. It's the rainy season, but in fact, it turned out to be the universe is nature is on our side despite climate change. It's a very nice day, and there's a cool breeze flowing through the garden, so we're not too hot. And so that's the first. The other first is this is the first time we've done a webinar in English inviting an ambassador to speak at the event, and this will open up a series. We want LP3S wants to be like a hub for interaction, Indonesia interacting with the world. So because that is the only way to develop ourselves if we open up to the world. And the third thing is that it's a kind of relaunch of the Gender Center, because in the beginning, when the Gender Center was set up at the beginning of this year in January, actually it was launched in December 2021. It was called the Gender and Democracy Center. But then a few months ago, we had a new leadership, and Pak Fahmi Wibawa is now the executive director of LP3S. And I must say, I'm very happy to have you on board, because I feel that we really click on, we align on many issues and on our vision and mission for LP3S and for Indonesia. So he was the one who suggested to change the name of the center to Gender Equity and Social Inclusion, because not just gender equality, because equity is justice. Justice is something that is very, very important. You can have equality, but not justice. And social inclusion means that it considers minorities, minorities who are often excluded, and like religious minorities, sexual minorities, and other minorities like the disabled, they will also be part of our consideration. So this is a very exciting time for us. Before I start, I also would like to thank Kamala Chandra Kirana, also a very old friend and a comrade, I would say. She's we fight together for gender. We have known each other for decades. Our ages has not lessened our enthusiasm and our fervor to fight for gender equality. I would also like to mention thanks to Hari Wibowo, who lent us the tent and the equipment for the garden, because you have to have special equipment for outside, and he lent all this equipment at the last minute, and it really helped a lot. I think that's all I want to say for today. And now I hand over the mic to Leah to kick off the talk by Marina and the discussion, which I hope you will all participate in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, the director for the Gender Gender Equity and Social Inclusion, Ibu Julia Kursuma, Surya Kusuma, for her very positive views of what we're going to fight and develop in the next years ahead. Now we're coming to our special guest of today, Her Excellency Ambassador Marina Burke for Sweden to Indonesia. She was a former director, deputy head, Department for Development Corporation, and previously has served among other at the Swedish Foreign Ministry Department of the European Union, as well as the Department for African Affairs. She will represent our topic of today, which is shared power, shared responsibility, Sweden's journey towards gender equality. Ladies and gentlemen, Her Excellency, Marina Burke.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, it's an honor for me to be here, and thank you so much, Executive Director of LP TGS, and also Director Ibu Julia, for inviting me and to be the first one in the hot spot here. So yeah, hot spot. And Ibu, thank you so much for joining me here. It's a fantastic day. Yes. The weather is nice, and talking about a subject that is so important for all people. It's a very important subject, not just for women, but definitely for the whole world and everyone out there. But let me first start by acknowledging the Center LP3S as one of the oldest and of Indonesian civil society organization that plays a pivotal role, I must say, in achieving a just Indonesian society. I've just learned that for more than 50 years you have been active, which is so fantastic to hear. And I really hope that your work will continue and become the hub for international interactions. And I do agree very much. We have to interact to learn more from each other. And the work you do is so much, of course, in line with the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. But also, I think you started the sustainability thinking in this center long before we have the Sustainable Development Agenda in place globally. So this is important, not just for Indonesia, but we are in times when we see democracy decreasing around the world. And then we really need to focus on the threats and challenges to democracy. We have seen a worsening situation with the pandemic, the Russian aggression on Ukraine, which is a blunt aggression to the world order, international law, and the UN Charter, which has resulted in, as you have seen and noticed, increased food prices and increased energy prices. And as always, the most vulnerable groups are the most effective, and among them, women and girls are mostly affected by the effects of increased food prices and decreased democracies. So democracy has to be defended every day. And I hope that your work here at the center continues to do all it can to be a strong voice and actor for democratic development in Indonesia. And I'm happy to support that, of course. Let me start my intervention by stating an obvious fact. A couple of obvious facts. Gender equality is a crucial, is a crucial feature of democratic societies. Gender equality is not about women, nor about men. It's about human rights. Granting equal rights or equity for all is the very essence of any democratic society. Remember that no women in the world, dead or living today, have ever experienced gender equality. My country, or before I go into the history of Sweden, let me just mention that for a very long time in my life, gender equality was a given thing. My country, Sweden, has for very long been a strong promoter of gender equality, and we have come far. And there is a law in place that protects us from gender discrimination. But we have not reached all the goals. We still have a way to go, and there are always setbacks, even in Sweden. And having said that, Sweden stands firm on the fundamental principle that everyone, regardless of gender, has the right to work and support themselves, to balance career and family life, and to live without fear of abuse or violence. Gender equality is also a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. Perhaps most importantly, when you look at the history of Sweden, gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but it is also the right thing to do, meaning also being the smart thing to do. Closing the gender gap, especially in the labor market, could add billions of dollars to the economies. So actually, starting from that perspective, Sweden's experience shows that when women work, the economy grows. Investments in gender equality in the workforce have made Sweden and the Nordic region at large one of the most prosperous areas of the world. The ambition of economic growth and prosperity were back in the 1960s and 1970s, one of the main reasons why Sweden started to push for women to start working. The work on gender equality were from the beginning not really a gender equality driven issue. So what is then the story about Sweden? It started actually with education. Already in 1842, compulsory elementary school was introduced for both girls and boys. In 1927, a new school reform came into place that made it possible for girls to receive public education on the same terms as boys. And this was, as you understand, a game-changing move, as it raised the overall level of education among the people and fostered progress in all aspects of the society. It also became a vital component in the Swedish journey from a poor country, poor agriculture nation to a prosperous, high-tech, innovative, leading country. Fast forward, we're now in the 1970s. And up until then, I have to admit, the workforce were mainly man-dominated, and most women were taking care of the children and the households on their own. And during the decade of 1970s, gender equality issues became a separate policy domain, and it has continued to be so, and have had a central position in the public debate ever since. Some of the most important political reforms took place in the labor market and in the social care system in the 1970s. For instance, in 1971, separate taxation was introduced, an income law term that indicates that one person is taxed without regard to any other person's income or circumstances. This meant that married women became financially independent and individuals. And women's self-evident right to support themselves took a big step forward. Previously, the women's income had placed on top of the men's income as a joint taxation, and tax-wise, there was not much left for women's income. Married women were before 1971 economically dependent on their husbands. The special taxation led to a considerable increase in women's employment and in women's empowerment. In 1974, Sweden became the first country in the world to introduce gender-neutral paid parental leave. That reform also includes the development of affordable and quality public childcare. Parts of the unpaid household work, sorry, this is a very difficult word, household work, then before, and social care often performed by women previously, then became the responsibility of the public welfare system. So these reforms have pushed gender equality and increased women's prospects to have the same opportunities as men to enter the labor market. Today, every couple, parents, listen now carefully, this is big news for you, I think. So today, every couple of parents share 480 days paid parental leave. 3 months of these 480 days are devoted exclusively to the father, cannot be given away to the mother, which means and gives the opportunity for women to go back and work much earlier than previously was the case. The title of this event today, Shared Power and Shared Responsibility, came from the government bill on the Swedish government bill on equality policy that was adopted in 1994 by the Swedish Parliament. Since then, gender mainstreaming has been a core strategy in the Swedish policy-making decisions. It has become an integrated policy within all policy-making. According to the strategy, gender equality's perspective must be integrated into the regular operations and not merely be dealt with as a separate parallel track. All decisions in all policy areas at all levels shall be viewed by a gender equality perspective. It can sound very difficult, but it's quite easy. It's not rocket science at all. It applies particularly to education, healthcare, labor market, and social and economic policies. Since 1988, the Swedish government has published reports on distribution of economic resources between women and men as part of the state budget bill. The latest report revealed that the labor income gap between women and men in Sweden has decreased from 30% to 24% between 2009 and 2019. So as you can see, we still struggle with improving our situation. The policy reforms, which I've mentioned, education, tax, and childcare policy reforms have contributed to the development of a modern welfare state in Sweden that stands for inclusivity and equality. But other important enabling factors and reforms, despite from the ones I've mentioned, include promoting women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. The underpinning notion is that everyone has the right to decide over their own body. A matter of human rights and democracy. No one should, for instance, be forced into a marriage or to be told what to do. Friends, this is serious subjects, but we have to look at it on a very, positive angle as well. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of things that Sweden does quite well, but we have many things to do in the future, and as we speak, we are not perfect. Gender equality must be defended every day, also in Sweden. The pay gap is still there, for instance. For doing the same job, men in general are paid more than women. Parts of the labor markets, both private and public, remain a male dominated field. As I said in the beginning, I grew up thinking that gender equality was a given thing. And it is in our DNA in Sweden. I think that is what stands out between Sweden and many other countries. And I cannot talk for the Nordic countries in general, but I think it's quite similar, that we are very friendly to each other between women and men. We have, of course, during history had different roles, but still helped out. You know, when I grew up, my parents, my grandparents, and great grandparents helped each other within the household. They share the responsibilities. So for me, gender equality was not there because I was also given all the opportunities. I was given the same chances as everyone else when I grew up. Another important issue of concern is violence against women, and violence against women persists, even in Sweden. Over the years, the number of reported cases of violence against women in Sweden has risen significantly. But this is mainly due to the changing attitudes that society encourage women to speak out, to report sexual harassment and violence. Remember that I mentioned in the beginning that we now have a law in place that protect us from discrimination, which means there's a law base to lean on. This law also means that all employers, private and public, have to tackle the challenges they face and to stick to zero tolerance of discrimination. And they have to report back yearly to the government. Even if the number of reported cases, as I mentioned, in Sweden has increased, still many cases go unreported. Preventing violence from happening in the first place must be central to any strategy to eliminate violence against women. It is possible, but only if we act in a holistic way. We need all parts of the society to work together. For instance, in Sweden, we have started a public project where the police force work together with the health sector and social care systems. But fundamental to it all is political support and will, and laws in place. Best practices from Sweden include the Swedish Act on prohibiting the purchase of Act of prohibiting the purchase of sexual services. It came into force in 1999. That was the first law to make it illegal to buy sexual services without punishing the prostitute. That is important, without punishing the prostitute. In 2005, the offense was incorporated into the Swedish Penal Code. Furthermore, in 2018, it's quite late, but at least it came around, Sweden adopted a new sexual consent law, which states that sex without explicit consent is rape. You have to, yes. And even if you don't say it, there has to be a question, you know, do you want to have sex? And if there is any hesitance, it is rape. So I hope that these examples can be taken into consideration as Indonesia is setting up rules and regulations to implement the sexual violence crime law that came into force earlier this year. Friends, I've talked quite long. I have just a few lines before I finish up. I can assure you that gender equality is a fundamental value in Sweden and will always be, no matter what government we have. It will also be an important and highly prioritized part of our foreign policy. Rights, representation, and resources, the 3 R's of our then feminist foreign policy, are still very valid and much present in the new Swedish government, regardless of the appellation of the term or the term. So, the core question often is, how do we end the patriarchy society we live in Indonesia, in Sweden, in the world? There's so many questions, to be honest. Why, for instance, are women seen as difficult when they claim their rights? And then on the other hand, why are not men seen as difficult when they treat women badly? I have talked about what can be done from a law and policy perspective, but each of us also has a responsibility to dismantle patriarchy societies, break the gender norms, encourage girls to take up their space, defend small girls who has a bossy attitude. Tell them that is a good management skill, because that is what you should have told small boys. Let small young boys cry and show their feelings. On the opposite, to be human. And this has to be taught early in age. You have to start very early to change attitudes and mindsets. And let me end by stating the obvious. It is everyone's responsibility to make the world a better place to live in. And that will happen if you and I and all of us start with the small things in life, within your own family and own community. By sharing responsibilities, you also share the powers from within the family to the workforce, up to the global arena. And that is how democracy should work. And with democratic societies and equality and equity, the world will become a peaceful, prosperous, and a sustainable place to live in. Thank you so much.
Terima kasih. Menurut Duta Besar Marina Berg, demokrasi di dunia sedang mengalami penurunan, gitu ya. Apalagi dengan kondisi pandemi, terus kemudian perang di Ukraina yang meningkatkan permasalahan untuk ketersediaan pangan dan energi, gitu. Yang dampaknya selalu pada perempuan. Terus kemudian di sini sebuah fakta bahwa keseimbangan gender itu sangat penting di dalam masyarakat sebagai sebuah hak. Negara Sweden adalah yang sangat mendorong untuk adanya kesetaraan gender dan ada produk-produk hukum dan regulasi yang mendukungnya. Hak untuk bekerja dan memberi sokongan jauh dari rasa takut. Terus sangat penting untuk menutup gap tentang gender ini dalam hal perekonomian supaya negara bisa tumbuh. Permasalahan kesetaraan gender ini sudah mulai di Sweden dari tahun 1800 dan kemudian di sana perempuan sudah mulai bisa bersekolah dengan bersama yang student laki-laki di tahun 1927, terus ada perkembangan di dalam masyarakat yang akhirnya sampai dengan menjadi sebuah negara yang high-tech seperti itu. Hasilnya adalah pada tahun 1970 itu ketika kebijakan itu masih dipisah antara perempuan dan laki-laki, di 1900 akhirnya sudah terjadi reformasi gender untuk sangat netral gitu ya. Didorong di sini di mana ada tempat pendidikan anak yang disediakan oleh negara, terus bagaimana perempuan memiliki lebih banyak prospek untuk masuk ke dalam pasar pekerjaan seperti itu. Terus ada juga cuti yang saling cuti ketika misalnya punya anak nanti. Nah, terus kemudian pada saat ini topik untuk kebijakan-kebijakan kesetaraan gender itu didorong strateginya di dalam kebijakan terpusat Sweden gitu ya, agar permasalahan kesetaraan gender itu perspektifnya masuk ke semua lini. Sangat penting di sini ada reformasi tentang pendidikan dan pajak, terus bagaimana untuk mendorong masalah reproduksi wanita, haknya, dan walaupun ini adalah subjek yang sangat berat gitu ya, tetapi harus dibicarakan. Nah, pada dasarnya sama dengan seluruh dunia, kekerasan terhadap perempuan beberapa waktu ini meningkat, tetapi di Sweden juga ada undang-undang terhadap kekerasan seksual terhadap perempuan dan anti diskriminasi, sehingga pendekatannya adalah untuk agar kekerasan itu ditangani secara holistik dari polisi, dari pekerja sosial dan pekerja kesehatan, dan juga ada kemauan politik. Nah, kemudian isu-isu lainnya adalah tentang permasalahan pemerkosaan dan kemudian hak tentang representasi sebagai negara yang mendorong kebijakan feminis seperti itu. Nanti mungkin dari yang hadir di sini atau online bisa bertanya lebih lanjut tentang kebijakan feminis, dan yang paling penting di sini bagaimana kita bisa berinteraksi dan belajar bersama untuk mendorong agar patriarki itu segera berakhir seperti itu. Ambassador Berg, we had just finished our research on how the millennials view gender, and we see here that women as caregiver is still seen as positive in the society. So they are still talking about what women should do and how they live by supporting men, and they are trying to find people with other networks outside, but it's quite challenging. So they're very afraid to be labeled as feminist or as somebody who goes against the society, because their women are always portrayed as to be the one to support. So here, feminist is still seen as something dominating, and I think the next discussion is an expert in this and can share to us on about this issue and how Indonesia has developed all these years. So we invite Ibu Kamala Chandra Kirana. So the interesting part is that Mbak Nana, I told her, Mbak Nana's father is one of the thinkers that founded GIS. A lot of his books, his scholar, is above in our library, and I think we together right now still share his views, especially on democracy. So please, Banana, the time is yours.
Ya, selamat siang semua. Ambassador Burke, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And Julia, thank you for doing this initiative because I think it's time for Indonesians to know more about the world and make the world better, even for Indonesia. Um, Tugas saya di sini adalah untuk bertanya. Jadi saya tidak akan presentasi. I will be I've been tasked by Julia to ask questions to you, which I will do. But firstly, I just want to start with a very interesting statement you made that uh, that in Sweden, gender equality is part of its DNA. But despite that, it still needs to be defended every day. Jadi walaupun kesetaraan gender di Swedia itu yang disampaikan oleh duta besar Swedia bahwa kesetaraan gender itu sudah seperti dalam DNA-nya bangsa Swedia, tapi sampai hari ini kesetaraan gender masih harus dibela setiap hari. Ya, jadi kurang lebih nanti saya pertanyaannya sekitar sana. Tapi sebelum kita masuk ke tema, saya ingin memanfaatkan kesempatan ini untuk mengenal lebih jauh ambasador kita dari Swedia ya. So we will be talking about the issues that you raised, but before we begin the conversation on these big and important issues, it would be nice to get to know you a little bit more. So the first question will be more about you, Ambassador Berg, and because you mentioned about how the professions, the field of profession, are also often segregated based on gender and sex. And so my first question has to do with your experience entering into a field that, I don't know in Sweden, but globally and definitely in Indonesia, is often seen as an area where men dominate, which is on international diplomacy, foreign relations. So my first question has to do with when did you join the foreign service in Sweden? What motivated you to choose this profession? Was there things that encouraged you or discouraged you at that time that made you convinced that this is the profession you need to enter? Give us a sense of what the moment was socially, politically, economically in Sweden at that moment when you made the decision to join the foreign service.
Well, thank you so much. How many hours do we have? Yeah. No, well, when it comes to my professional career, first of all, I would like to see myself as a person who makes a life career, where the professional career is part of it. And I also mentioned to you that I grew up in a family where I was protected that well that I didn't realize, how unequal the world is. And when my eyes opened up for how unequal the world is, I was more in the beginning realizing how unequal economic terms we have around the world. So very early in my life, I got interested in international relations, international issues. And my main aim was to work with people. When I started university, many things came up to my mind. First of all, I landed correctly. I landed with, it's okay with the cats. There's so many nice cats coming around here. I started to study economics and social studies as in psychology and economic history. And I always geared into, finding the human being in everything I was studying, because finding out the sooner the better for everyone, that whatever happens in the world, the factor behind are human beings, and how to interact and how to make the world better and how to be helpful and work with people was sort of my inner aim all the time. And I ended up doing my final exam in Zambia in Africa. I got a scholarship and did my thesis there. And that was when I realized, well, I really need to go into the Foreign Service in some way. That's how it started. So in 1995, I started to work in the Foreign Service. I've been there and been loyal to the Foreign Service ever since. So that is sort of my working path. But it's worth mentioning in relation to the question also that I was, living in not a bubble. I was definitely shown the world, but I was given the opportunities equal to anyone else, whether it be boys or girls, when I grew up. My father gave me the opportunity, my mother gave me the opportunities to do whatever I wanted, and the sky was the limit. Always think about, that nothing is impossible. And that was also how I started to play football when I was 6 years old. And when I was like 13, 14, I was very decisive that I was going to be a career football player. And I didn't end my football career until I was 18. I started to play with boys because in my village, there was no girl team. Now, and when I end, of course, I should also mention that when I finished my career as a football player, we had actually created several girl teams, and we had a women football team, playing at quite high level beforehand. So, and that was because, if one starts, and it was actually my father who was the driving force to create this female, together with another father, to establish this girl teams within football. So that was, sort of bigger view of how I became the person I am.
Thank you. Very interesting. Football and Foreign Service. We'll get back to that. That's very interesting. I think there might be some interesting lessons that you have taken into your profession. Almost 30 years in the Foreign Service. But before getting to the football and Foreign Service, I think it would be nice to understand a little bit more about Sweden. And just, I think it's Sweden has been, the World Economic Forum has produced this global ranking of gender equality since 2006. So it's been more than 15 years, I think. And Sweden has always been in the top 5, never below. So it will be interesting to learn a little bit more about Sweden. What are the necessary conditions for progress on gender equality? I mean, we won't be the same, our Indonesia's trajectory on gender equality will not be the same as Sweden, but we can learn from the process and the dynamics in Sweden, and things that would help us in making our decisions today in Indonesia. So, I mean, the journey is different. I noted in 1927 was the school reform that allowed for women, girls to be part of public education. And just 1 year after that, in 1928, Indonesia had its first Congress of Women, Congress Perempuan Indonesia, in December. We'll be celebrating it in a few weeks' time. And so actually, there must be something in the air at that time that made women aware that or others, all aware that there was a problem here. But I think the fact that we needed this 100 years to still process is something, says something to us. But back to Sweden, and also the your initial kind of impetus to enter into the field of foreign service related to the economic inequality in the world. So it would be interesting to get your view about to what extent is the uh, progress on gender equality connected to economic growth and economic stability and political stability. To what extent is that connected? Because Sweden's experience and maybe Zambia you saw at that time and maybe other countries, uh, there may be links. I mean, it's not a direct link, but maybe you can give us a sense of how you think that's connected in terms of opportunities and constraints in ensuring that progress continues to move to advance. Um, because of course, gender equality is not something that happens in isolation of the economy and of politics. So if you can give us a little sense from the experience of Sweden, but also your experience in other parts of the world, um, and maybe tell us a little bit more also about progress and setbacks. I mean, I guess this is a question. Given all the just amazing progress and achievements in Sweden with regard to the legal and policy framework for gender equality, has it always been kind of smooth sailing steps progress, or were there setbacks? Were there uh, resistance against that? What happened when there was challenges? Who were the ones who kind of kept the struggle alive and that it would move forward? So it's a little bit of a reflection on Sweden's journey.
Well, there are very many angles to this question, many questions in one. I'll try. I'll try to capture it. First of all, I said in my speech that gender equality and the aim for gender equality was not really the spirit that made Sweden take into the path. I mean, jump into the path of gender equality development. It was because we needed women in the workforce. That was a time when Sweden really needed to improve its economic growth. And what happens if you leave 50% of the economic force, labor force outside the labor market? There has been many studies about this, how much a country actually lose if you leave women outside the labor market. And of course, you cannot compare Sweden to Indonesia because right now we are about 11 million people and you have 270 million people. So maybe that kind of, issue is not really applicable in Indonesia, but still there is another aspect of that, and that is how valuable and smart it is to actually integrate different mindsets and minds into the working place, the labor market. To be innovative, to be high-tech country, you need all minds there. And you need to educate the whole population, because what is really dangerous in a country is if you have a huge minority or huge group of people not being educated and more introvert. Then it becomes so difficult for government to make the right decisions, because governments always have to do what the people want them to do. So education is, as we've talked about, core thing for developing your mindset and develop people and to be more equity society. That is one thing. The other thing I was thinking about when you talked about what is the perception of Sweden, we have setbacks and challenges. And I said that as well. And I think that in every society, in every country, when people realize there is a competition, when people realize there is a competition on the higher level of positions in the workplace, in the working place, in the labor market, a little bit more like that. Is it all? You're more close, like this. Okay. Yeah. So when there is a when you realize that women are becoming more educated, when women become more educated and there are more women in the workforce, it's easy to blame, you know, the latest group of people that came into the market when the competition increases. But still, you have to realize that the competition is just as much between men as between women and men. But then we come into the labor market at the late, the women, come into the labor market at the late stage when there is already a brotherhood among men. When I came into the workforce in 1995, as I said, I wasn't really aware about the inequalities, but what I realized quickly was that I had only men as my bosses in the management. There were just a few women in management within the Foreign Service in Sweden. And those women were not kind at all to the younger women. So, and that was because they had to, I mean, in the beginning of their career, fight on men's term. But that is something, you know, that has changed a lot in the workforce in Sweden. There is not just men's terms, there are women's terms in combination, which has become a threat to men, of course, because they have to adapt to new society. And it's not as frightening in the house at home as it is at your working place, right? Because there you really have to defend your income, your living, you know, your position in the society is judged which kind of job you have. I think those are quite a few perspectives that I would like to share, but what also in relation to the latter is the Swedish former Prime Minister Stefan Löfven initiated together with state leaders at a UN Congress years ago, Men for Women. No, Men for thank you, Natasha. He for she. What I think is missing still, and that we need to work with more, is she for she.
Yes, interesting. I'm checking on the time whether we can move to the next or not. Yeah, we still have a lot of time. Okay. Maybe if you can tell us a little bit more about the new entrance into the labor market and how that has disrupted the hierarchies that existed. And if you can tell us a little bit more about the diversity of Swedish women. Tell us a little bit more about the diversity among women, because you're talking about women for women or she for she. And one of the challenges, I mean, that is a call that we are all kind of trying to respond to in a very genuine way. And when we are trying to respond to that, we begin to be, there's demand for us to understand the diversity among women and how we, as women in particular positions in society, engage with many different types of women, whether they are different because of their economic backgrounds, their cultural backgrounds, their social backgrounds. So maybe if you can tell us, give us a little picture of what the diversity of Swedish women are like and how they're faring in this struggle for gender equality. Just a little picture to help us imagine what it's like there.
I just got one picture and I will sort of spell it out quickly because it's a difficult question again. But I think the struggle for gender equality has not been, of course, it's a struggle, but it's been quite a sort of given when it all started because there were no one actually questioning women entering the labor market. No one was actually saying, well, women should not work because it was very, immediately realized by most people that women are needed. But what has been, a reflection from my perspective is that it took more than, 3-4 decades until we realized that women cannot be double working, meaning, that women who used to take the most responsibilities at home also had to continue to do that at the same time as they were working full time in the labor market. So that is my sort of quick reflection, so the struggle is not as much as, coming out in the working force or work for women. The struggle is still in Sweden to make it easy for women to sort of balance the work life and their private life. And that is when you need political reforms still, and to develop the political reforms. I mentioned the political reforms in the social sector in Sweden, where we now have, of course, since very long time ago, very good high quality childcare schools, and I mean, children are taken care of before they start the elementary school, and when schools end in the afternoons, they still have somewhere to go. There's still a childcare after school, which is of course essential for women to work. And then parental leave. Without parental leave being shared equally between the father and the mother, so important, because what we saw, and you have to evaluate policy reforms all the time, what we saw was that women took, the parental leave days. Almost 100% of all women took all of them. They did not give any to the men. And that was because the unequal, salaries, that men still earn more money. So it was more, beneficial for the families that the men were working, and the mother took care of the children. But then when that statistic came out, they changed the policies and made sure that they devoted 3 months of parental leave only for the father. You have to continue to develop and evaluate policies because they are not perfect in the beginning.
Thank you. So the policies may be good at a particular moment, but as society changes, it has impact. It impacts different women differently, and so it needs to always be reviewed so that it maintains the ability to actually achieve the kind of change, real change on the ground. Okay, I'm going to move to the next kind of theme. So this was, jadi ini pertanyaan tadi menyangkut Swedia, gitu ya. Jadi supaya kita sedikit lebih memahami, membayangkan seperti apa ini perjuangan untuk kesetaraan gender di sebuah negara yang termasuk dalam top 5 di dunia. Gitu. Nah, sekarang kita akan beranjak ke soal global. Gini, karena Ambassador Berg ini kan sebagai punya karir di diplomasi internasional, jadi kita juga ingin mendapatkan pandangannya tentang dunia. So we now move to the next theme, which is on international relations and diplomacy in the context of gender equality. One of the things I noted from what you described in your presentation was that in 1994 was when the the equality policy was kind of mainstreamed into policy making in Sweden. And it's interesting that it's just a year before the global world meeting in Beijing in 1995. And 3 years after that, we in Indonesia went through our reformasi. So it was the late 90s was a moment of change in Indonesia during reformasi. We had many progress also on women's rights, including the organization that I led for 11 years, Komnas Perempuan. Uh, so, and you mentioned at the beginning just the state of the world today, which is full of crisis, actually. The decreasing democracy, the pandemic and its impact on rising inequality globally, the war in Ukraine, the aggression by Russia that has resulted in food and energy crisis around the world. These are we are living in a crisis situation right now. And yet, you know, as part of the Swedish Foreign Service, the agenda on rights, representation, and resources continues to be a fundamental agenda for you. So, given this, you know, it would be nice to hear your reflections on how the world has changed on gender equality in your view, given the current crisis. And where do you think the points of vulnerability are? I mean, many of us are facing regression in many ways because the crisis is so severe. And maybe there are other dimensions in this crisis. I mean, the decreasing democracy has many faces, and we in Indonesia face that as well. So, what do you think, given this crisis, in terms of um, international diplomacy, right? How much more difficult or how much more easy is it to use international diplomacy as a way to advance gender equality in multiple parts of the world? You know, so international diplomacy, international relations, international diplomacy as a means to push for gender equality in a time of global crisis. What do you think are kind of the challenges, and what do you think are the opportunities that we need to seize and strengthen to ensure that in this moment of crisis we continue to advance as a global community?
I need a PhD too. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Reflections. First of all, I would like to start on what you said, that the world is changing and we see more challenges today than we have seen for a very long time. It's a global shift that we are experiencing right now. We don't know really where it will end, for sure. But what we see is that the rule of law and international law, international order, UN Charter, is being threatened. And it is mainly because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It might be difficult to see these connections, but what is actually happening is that one state is acting aggressively on what has been globally, universally decided upon, that we are sovereign states being able to decide on our own premises, and that we are is questioning that international relation and multilateralism is the core thing to preserve, and the only way to preserve
peace and security and stability and prosperity in the world. So how do we then defend multilateralism? That is, the question of today. How do we defend, the UN Charter, which is a firm foundation for equality, equity, sustainability, and a prosperous world? We need to fight for working together between countries bilaterally, regionally, and globally. And within that, pivotal issue is gender equality. There's no democracy without gender equality. So it's all bind together in a way. You cannot talk separately about gender equality if you not talk about democratic values and how to defend democracy. And I said, I think, to you all before that it is not rocket science when it comes to gender equality. It's an easy fix if we all think alike. And thinking alike is about caring about each other, making everyone be equal and share the value of being that everyone is valuable. And that would mean we're talking about the 3 R's. Let me just explain a little bit about 3 R's, which I think is a basic thing for society, family, society, country, global level. Resources. Make sure that girls and women are giving the same resources as men when it comes to whatever you do, schools, healthcare, education and healthcare is given, but also when it comes to laws and regulations, every time you decide upon a new law, make sure that you have thought about it and give enough resources for women to be included in that law and give the same opportunities, resources. And then rights. It's everybody's rights to be represented. Sorry, I'm mixing it. Everybody's rights to be fairly treated, right? To have the same rights as men, as everybody. Women's rights should be equal to men's rights, no question about it. And then representation. I'm so happy to see that we have men in the audience, because we cannot talk about gender equality without talking to each other with men. No panels without a mix of women and men. It's just one example of how you can work with specifically representation. Those are sort of broad pictures of everything. But there is one more thing I would like to add, and that is that a modern society should have a firm basis of values based on international law, rule of law, human rights, and democracy, universal agreed regulations. It should actually, in a modern society, be separated from religion.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting, and I think something I hope can trigger some questions. How do we talk about universality in different contexts, including in the context of the diversity of religions in the world? I just want to share with you a little bit of experience, Julia. I hope you don't mind. We just had the what we call Congress Ulama Perempuan Indonesia, KUPI, the Indonesian Women Ulama Congress, which I was part of in terms of in my various engagements with social movements. And it's very interesting because there is this is a space in which women ulama, with their religious, with the religious paradigm and way of thinking, that believe in the universality of equality between men and women, and that in their view, Islam also supports this, despite the fact that the dominant ways in which the religion has been interpreted has undermined this very value. So it's an interesting, I think Indonesia has some very interesting responses to this question that hopefully there will be time also for Julia Center to explore. But I wanted to get back to uh, something practical. You said difficult, big questions. Now we want to get to a practical question, but on a difficult issue. You mentioned that with the current crisis, people call it poly crisis, so multiple crises, multiple crises all at once influencing each other, creating a moment of crisis that is unprecedented, at least during our lifetimes, right? Um, and that one of the challenges internationally, because we're looking at international, is defending multilateralism, and with the assumption that the multilateral system is protecting and defending the universal values of humanity, right? And that gender equality is part of that universal value that the multilateral system is trying to defend. So I want to get back to your football life and ask you a practical question. If our at the global level, our task now is to support the effectiveness of the multilateral system, what are some of the lessons from your football career that would be useful practically to so that we can all see this not as this really complicated thing that you have to, know all the conventions article by article. Maybe you don't need to, but maybe there's some practical things that we as citizens of Indonesia and citizens of the world can do, and that we can learn from your experience as a football player.
Very concrete, but quite difficult. No, I think I can answer it, but let me just continue a little bit where I finished last time. I said separate religion from politics. I didn't mean separate, religious values, but what I'm from real life. But what I meant that you have to develop religious, and I mean values with what happens in the world. And you have to adopt to the changing world, and you have to, within your religious values, defend the global universal values. So coming back to my football career, what did I learn? I definitely learned that you cannot win a football game if you have only, you said center court players in the team. You need to mix a team with different players, with different capacities and different skills. And you always have to have a goalkeeper. And when you build up a team in the office, make sure that everybody's capacity, competences, experiences are being not exploited, but used efficiently, and make sure that they fit well together. As a manager, I think that is, as a diplomat and as a public servant within the Foreign Service, I think my most important task is to make sure that the resources I have, which is actually people, are being used the best way and most efficient way possible, and make sure that we combine teams in a way that we actually win the game. The goalkeeper is always the one to make sure that the manager does not miss any balls, right? That you have to find someone who is actually taking care of the manager.
Right. I think in the spirit of the World Cup, we all can imagine just how that kind of division of labor and teamwork, and who's defending what, and who's doing the attack, who's the defense. I think we can imagine that, and see just how that is so necessary in in all in all of our life struggles, and that whether it's to ensure that Indonesia's policy and law framework can continue to be meaningfully impacting the lives of women and men, a more equal life in all aspects of life, or in terms of making the multilateral system work for all of us, so that we have a better life for everyone in this world, in this moment of global crisis. So these are the questions for me. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'll give the mic to Leah. Yeah.
Apakah ada mau pendapat atau masukan dari teman-teman? Oh iya, silakan. Banyak banget.
Tadi Julia nanya bisa ada summary nggak? Tapi mudah-mudahan ini direkam ya. Dan catatan dari rekaman ini mudah-mudahan menjadi salah satu arsipnya pusatnya Julia di LP3S ini, dan dia bisa menjadi sumber rujukan untuk diskusi-diskusi lanjutan untuk membuat summary hari ini, karena kita eksplorasi kemana-mana. Mungkin lebih baik kita membaca catatannya, nanti bisa di WhatsApp ya. Oke, makasih.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Nana, for the very, very difficult discussion question. And we learned a lot more about our ambassador, and about Sweden, and also about international relation topics. So before I give back to Ibu Julia for the recap and closing session, there's no Q&A from online. Ada pertanyaan di sini? Oh, go ahead.
Ginawati Batang Taris and the Sindo. You said you went to South Africa. Or Zambia. Oh, that's what I said. Why was it Zambia? You got a scholarship or in Zambia from Sweden? Because I've lived in Africa, so I'm very familiar with African countries.
Yes, I got a scholarship from Sweden to do my final exam work in Africa, in Zambia.
And also, I want to ask you, I think we have already apps and numbers to call for sexual violence and for children abuse, right? By the police. And does everybody know about it? Yeah, kan? Yes. I was just wondering about it. It's very important that people would know. And it doesn't have to be, one doesn't have to be, nothing else jadi korban. Okay, that's all. I was also the football team. I can relate to that. and was younger, you know. So you have to have teamwork. That's one-
Teamwork is important.
Yeah, that's okay.
This is interesting. We have here a group of women which has football athlete background. I was also as in the football athlete club in my junior high. So we have all these teams here. This is interesting. Uh, no, there is some question coming in. The first one is from Atashe Dartini Hapsa, actually for Banana here. So now during the pandemic, people are working from home and people still can do the small, medium enterprise work from home. So about this technology, digital technology, there's a bias, the bias in the labor market. How's it doing? How about those women who are working in the manufacturer and those working in the office and those working as small businesses? And are the policies right now enough to protect these women socially and economically? And how about is it enough our BPJS for the healthcare and pension fund? Is it enough for the women here? So I think Ibu Burke can also share a bit about during the pandemic. How is it when things become digital and when there is how many years have it? 2.5, 3 years. Yeah, we almost 3 years working from home. What was the situation in Sweden? And the next question is that uh, in Sweden, does single women pay tax higher than those who are married? So, what is the philosophy in this policy?
Yes, right. The pandemic has made life difficult to many people around the world. Sweden has been an exceptional case. We never had any formal lockdowns. Most children continue to go to school, except from high school level and universities. So what we can see from the statistics in Sweden is that those students who were actually forced to study from home was actually mentally affected by not meeting people during the day. We see effects of that. I have no statistic from other countries, but I guess it's the same thing. It's a global thing. If you're not meeting people, you're sitting on your own at home every day, and as long as years, and I mean for semesters, it's of course not good for your well-being mentally or physically. Not moving from the house to the school. Hopefully, you're doing some kind of exercise, but you know, it will have effects, and I don't think we have seen all the statistics yet. And of course, in countries like Indonesia, there is another challenge as well, that many of the students who were not able to go to school, they probably didn't have, all of them, of course, didn't have proper internet connections. So education and education will definitely lack. We will see the statistics later on, I think, and the effects from the pandemic. The second question was about tax. So let me explain this. Individual taxes are equal on all people. It's a percentage in relation to how much you earn. Doesn't matter if you are a man or a woman, it's equal. There's no difference. What I meant with individually tax, that we introduced individual taxation for women in the 1970s, was that before that, married women, their wages were put on top of the men wages. So men and women were before that tax reform taxed together, which left little salary left for women. But now it's equal.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Marina Burke. Well, the time has come to an end, but I'll give the opportunity for Bajulia as the director to give a statement.
That was incredible, actually. I was such a rich discussion and
More closer.
Huh?
Closer.
closer.
Yeah.
Uh,
A little bit tighter.
like this.
Yes.
Okay. So I have to learn to be a rock star. Okay. Yeah. Um. Yes. It was so incredibly rich, and I certainly was not wrong in asking Nana Kamala to be the discussant and interview. She's tough, isn't she? But I don't think you need to have a PhD. I mean, you answered the questions really, really well. I think that you are very modest when you say that we are still learning, we're facing challenges, but because obviously Sweden and Indonesia are at a very different level. But it's good to know. It's good to know that even such a country such as Sweden, which is like held in such high regard, and it's like when you think of Sweden, you don't just think of IKEA, but you think of gender equality. IKEA is of course, but I don't even know whether people know that IKEA is Swedish. But certainly, I think Sweden is equated with gender equality. So I think also we hope to actually I should have said to Nana that make it a cross-cultural comparison between Indonesia and Sweden, because in that way I think we can learn more from our experiences. And sometimes there is this attitude in Indonesia whereby we're defensive and say, oh, Asian values, we don't need feminism, which comes from the West and all that. Actually, feminism is just the name, maybe feminism is Western, but actually the practice of the culture of gender equality is very much there in Indonesia. And now it's becoming increasingly a challenge, but as we have seen from the response to the new criminal code, civil society is getting stronger. When we had the seminar a few days ago about the criminal code, one of the questions that was addressed to me was, how do we strengthen civil society? Civil society in Indonesia has never been as strong as it is now, actually. But this, of course, is met with challenges from the state and the oligarchy. But I think that is happening worldwide, right? So I think there's even more of a need now to engage with other countries so that we feel that we're not struggling alone. This is not just Indonesia's struggle, but the struggle even of countries, a country like Sweden, where now you have a right-wing government, and I was not really expecting that. But then you have many other. This is happening in other countries as well. It's in Italy and in Hungary, Poland. I mean, that's happened long before. And so I think it's very, very necessary to see these global trends, and so that we know we have to compare our performance also to assess where we are. I think this inauguration of the gender center with a new name, gender equity and social inclusion, has been really successful, and it will kick off more discussions, and I will and I'm sure we learn just not just from Western countries, of course, also um, countries with Muslim majority countries and countries from even as far as Africa, where we don't normally associate with you. It's often surprising to know how much we have in common with countries that we don't think that we have in common. I mean, I see commonalities between Indonesia and Sweden. I mean, like that, there's this, what you describe as the struggle for gender equality is like we're going through it here. It's just that you're a bit more, you're more ahead, and your societal level of development is also, and also you're a smaller country. So that's um, much, in a way, easier to manage. So I think that's probably it for me. I just want to, there was something that I forgot to do, and when I opened the webinar is to translate what I said in Indonesian. Jadi tadi saya di permulaan tuh bercerita bahwa ini merupakan pertama ya untuk beberapa hal, yaitu di kebun, bikin acara di kebun yang cemas itu bahwa nanti bahwa akan hujan, tapi cuacanya bagus. The weather was perfect, wasn't it? I mean, it was not too hot, and banyak angin, there's a breeze as well. Dan ini juga pertama kali mengundang duta besar. Kebetulan Dubes Berg itu, Marina ini kawan dekat saya secara pribadi, jadi sangat menyenangkan gitu untuk menghadirkannya. Dan yang ketiga itu adalah bahwa ini merupakan semacam peluncuran kedua dari Gender Center yang sekarang bernama Pusat Keadilan Gender dan Inklusi Sosial. Mengapa keadilan gender? Karena kesetaraan itu tidak cukup, bisa aja setara tapi nggak adil. Dan inklusi sosial itu juga termasuk grup minoritas yang menurut saya gerakan feminisme itu selalu bersinambung dengan gerakan minoritas lainnya, social religious minorities, minoritas agama, minoritas seksual seperti LGBT. Itu yang untuk Indonesia, di negara yang mayoritas Muslim, itu ada resistensi gitu untuk membicarakannya. Meskipun dalam kenyataannya tuh ya sebetulnya itu satu kenyataan yang ada dalam masyarakat kita gitu. Jadi itu ya, itu teman. Last but not least, of course, I would like to thank you so much again, Marina, for coming here. And you're I know you're very busy. You have a Christmas lunch to attend, and then this afternoon you're going to Surabaya to open the IKEA center. What's the seventh? The seventh store in Indonesia. And of course, thanks so much, Nana, for being you. You are just being you, brilliant and incisive, and of course, she brings with her a wealth of experience, having been, as she mentioned, the was it the lead? Well, in different capacities, you were Secretary General and then something else, Chair of Komnas Perempuan, of the Women's the National Commission on Violence Against Women, and a host of other activities. And Nana is, she has extensive international experience, secular as well as Muslim. She was involved with Musawa. Are you still involved with Musawa? And she is also the on the steering committee of KUPI. Yeah, steering committee KUPI, and sorry. And UN human rights special procedures. So wow, it's just an amazing resume. And of course, thank you to Leah, who is has, I have had her moderate very often for my webinars in our center, and she's moderated for other events and LPTGS as well. And I thought so I have no reason to doubt her, her abilities. Thank you for all of you who came here. Ibu Ira, who came all the way from Menteng. She's an old friend also. And thank you for all the young people. You are leading us, actually, very consciously, I am, my policy strategy is to actually learn from you, from young people, because you are the future. We are, of course, we have experience, we have knowledge and all that, but I think that it's the young people who are leading the world, the nation. I mean, you will inherit the earth, you will inherit this mess that we old people created, and you will be the ones who will hopefully correct it. So thank you all, and hope to see you again in the next webinar.
Yeah, there's a small gift for the ambassador.
Oh, yeah.
and banana.
Hopefully.
Thank you so much, everybody, online and offline, for joining today's Garden Series by the Gender Equity and Social Inclusion Center. Let us meet in the next discussion again in the following month. Please keep watching our social media.